Hello, welcome to Hikate's Crossing. Okay, we're going to continue reading The Secret of Shambhala, which is the third book with the by James Redfield in regards to the Celestine prophecy. Okay, so we're doing the In Search of the 11th Insight. Okay, so I'm going to use the Meraki Tarot, the third edition that I just received. So what we're going to do is we're going to think about chapter 4. Okay, we're up to chapter 4. So, what message do the cards have for us in regards to chapter 4? What's going to make us think and reflect on this chapter? Let's have a think here. Okay, chapter 4. I'm going to do 5 cards with this one here. Let's have a look. What are we going to get? What message are we going to get with the Meraki Tarot? Okay, the first thing we're looking at here is the Queen of Cups. So I think we're dealing very much about our emotions. Okay, it's about nurturing our emotions. It's maybe sense of mothering, taking care of that energy, taking care of others on some level. Oh, we got the word yes has come through quite strongly here. So whatever's going on for us as we read this chapter, it's all about that sense of taking action. It's all about things moving in the right direction here. We've got 6 of Wands with victory and success. So how do we have those moments that bring us achievements that we want in our life? You know, it's all about nurturing and taking care of our emotions, our sense of nurturing our soul. It's about, yes, I do feel like whatever's going on in regards to the journey, it's all about that things are happening. It's all about, yes, 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 you're on the right path. You're on, you know, you're moving in the right direction. It's all about acknowledging that success, that victory, even after all the struggles and things going on, as long as you're taking care of yourself. It's interesting because we also get the Chariot here. That's interesting. So again, you've got the triumph. It's all about successes. It's all about victories. It's all about, you know, how we feel. What's our focus? And we've got the sense of the Empress, about creating. It's interesting with the Empress as well. Again, with the Queen of Cups and the Empress. So this chapter seems to be very much about nourishing our soul, creating what we want in our life, moving forward, being on the right path, doing what we need to do to have the success, the victories, the triumphs, even after all the struggles and the challenges. What an interesting reading to reflect on. Wow. So here we've got the Queen of Cups with the Empress, right? And you've got the 6 of Wands here with the Chariot. Wow, with this, yes, it's this resounding, yes, you're moving in the right direction. Yes, you're doing all the right things. It's all about acknowledging the insights in what we're doing as we move forward on our journey. Wow, what an interesting reading with the Meraki Tarot. Wow, that's just got me, whew. So I want to reflect on those cards here. Okay, we get the sense of, what have we got in regards to fishes, birds, hummingbirds, birds. I think a lot about flying, moving freely. I get a sense of we needing to be aware. And I've got the mushrooms here. And so we do need to be aware of the mushrooms. You know, I think that's going to be the challenges there, is making sure that you're on the right path, is by making sure you're aware of distractions. I think it's very easy to get distracted by the pretty, prettiness of something or by what something looks like. And so we need to take a moment to be aware of our environment. Oh, that's very, very interesting. Okay, so let's have a look at chapter 4 here. Okay, chapter 4 is conscious alertness. I walked out of the Jeep feeling incredibly good. The air was cool and the mountains in every direction still seemed luminous. We got in the vehicle and Yin pulled away. One second there. Let me just pause that for a second. Sorry, I'm just going to cough. Sorry, excuse me. I didn't want to cough in your face as I started this chapter. Okay, let's start again. Conscious alertness. I walked out to the Jeep feeling incredibly good. The air was cool and the mountains in every direction still seemed luminous. We got in the vehicle and Yin pulled away. Do you know where to go now? I asked. I know that we must head towards northwest Tibet, according to the legends. This is the closest gateway to us. But as Lama Rigton said, we will have to be shown. Yin paused and glanced at me. It is time that I told you about my dream. The dream that Lama Rigton mentioned, I asked, the one you had of me? Yes. In this dream we are together journeying across Tibet looking for the gateway. And we could not find it. We journeyed very far and travelled in circles lost. But at the moment of our greatest despair we met someone who knew where we should go. What happened after that? The dream ended. Who was that person? Was it Will? No, I don't think so. What do you mean the dream means? It means we must be very alert. We rode in silence for a few moments and then I asked, are there many soldiers stationed in northwest Tibet? Not usually, he replied, except on the border or at the military bases. The problem is getting through the next 300 or 400 miles past Mount Kailash and Lake Manasarova. There are several military checkpoints. For 4 hours we rode without incident, travelling for a while on graded gravel roads, and then turning onto various dirt tracks for a time. We reached Saga without any difficulty, and hit what Yin told me was the southern route into western Tibet. We passed mostly large transport trucks or local Tibetans in older cars or in carts. A few foreign hitchhikers could be seen around the truck stops. After another hour, Yin pulled the Jeep off the main road and onto what amounted to only a horse path. The Jeep bounced over deep gullies. There is usually a Chinese checkpoint way up ahead on the main road, Yin said. We must go round. We were travelling up a steep slope, and when we got to the crest of the hill, Yin stopped the Jeep and led me to the edge of a cliff. Below us, several 100 feet away, we could see 2 large military trucks with Chinese insignia. Perhaps a dozen soldiers were standing by the road. This is not good, Yin said. There are usually only a few soldiers at this crossroads. They may still be looking for us. I tried to shake off a rush of anxiety and keep my energy high. I thought I saw several of the soldiers looking at the hill towards us, so I ducked down. Something is happening, Yin whispered. When I looked back at the crossroad, the soldiers were searching a van that had driven into the checkpoint. A middle-aged blonde man was standing on the side of the road being interrogated. Someone else was still in the van. We could just barely hear a European language being spoken. Sounded very much like Dutch. Why are they being detained? I asked Yin. I don't know, he said. They may not have the correct permits, or perhaps they asked the wrong questions. I lingered, wishing I could help. Please, Yin said, we must go. We got in the Jeep and Yin drove slowly around the rest of the hill and down the slope on the other side. At the bottom, we hit another narrow track that turned to the right, away from the crossroads, still heading northwest. We travelled on this road for about 5 more miles before it merged back into the main road and into Zongba, a small town with several hotels and a few shops. Here there were people walking, leading yaks and other livestock, and several land cruisers drove by. We are now just one of the pilgrims heading to Mount Kailash, Yin said. We will be less noticeable. I wasn't convinced. In fact, half a mile further, a Chinese military truck pulled onto the road directly behind us, and another surge of fear ran through me. Yin turned into a side street, and the truck moved past us and out of sight. "You must stay strong," Yin said. "It's time for you to learn the second extension." He went on to guide me through the first extension again until I could visualize and feel my energy flowing out in front of us and into the distance. Now that you have your energy moving out, you must set this field of attention to have this field of energy to have a certain effect. His comment fascinated me. Set my field? Yes, we can direct our prayer field to act on the world in various ways. We do this by using our expectations. You've already done this once, remember? Han taught you to expect that the energy would keep flowing through you. Now you must set your field with other expectations, and do so with true discipline. Otherwise, all your energy can quickly collapse in fear and anger. He looked at me with a sad expression I've never seen before. "What's wrong?" I asked. "When I was young, I watched a Chinese soldier kill my father. I hate and fear them intensely, and I must confess something. I myself am part Chinese. This is the worst part. It is this memory and guilt that erodes my energy, so that I tend to anticipate the worst. You will learn that at these higher levels of energy, our fields of prayer act very quickly to bring us exactly what we expect. If we fear, it brings to us what we fear. If we hate, it brings us more of what we hate. Thankfully, when we go into these negative expectations, our prayer fields collapse rather quickly because we lose our connection with the divine and are no longer outflowing love. But a fear expectation can still be powerful. That is why you must monitor your expectations carefully and set your field consciously." He smiled at me and added, "Because you don't hate the Chinese military the way I do, you have an advantage. But you still have much fear, and you seem to be capable of great anger, just like me. Perhaps that is why we are together." I was looking ahead at the road as we drove, thinking about what Yin was saying, not believing that our thoughts could be that powerful. My reverie was interrupted when Yin slowed the Jeep and parked in front of a line of dusty frame buildings. "Why are you stopping?" I asked. "Won't we draw more attention to ourselves this way?" "Yes," he said, "but we must risk it. The soldiers have spies everywhere, but we have no choice. It is not safe to go into the western areas of Tibet with only one vehicle. There are no places to make repairs. We must find someone to go with us. What if they turn us in?" Yin looked at me in horror. "That won't happen if we get the right people. What's your thoughts?" "I told you we have to set the right field around us. It's important." He started to get out of the car but hesitated. "You must do better than me in this regard, or we have no chance. Focus on setting your field for Rettenbril." I was silent for a moment. "Rettenbril? What's that?" "It's the Tibetan word for synchronicity. You must set your field to stay in the synchronistic process, to bring the intentions, the coincidence, the intuitions, the coincidences to help us." Yin glanced at the building and got out of the Jeep, indicating with his hand that he wanted me to stay. For almost an hour I waited, watching the Tibetan people walk by occasionally. I would see someone who looked Indian or European. At one point I even thought I saw the Dutchman we had seen at the checkpoint pass on a distant street. I strained to see, but I couldn't be sure. Where was Yin, I wondered. The last thing I needed was to be separated again. I imagined myself driving through this town all alone, lost, having no idea where to go. What would I do? Finally I saw Yin leave the building. For a moment he hesitated, looking both ways carefully before walking to the Jeep. "I found 2 people I know," he said as he climbed behind the wheel. "I think they will do." He was trying to be convincing, but his tone of voice betrayed his doubt. He started up the car and we drove on. 5 minutes later we passed a small restaurant made entirely from corrugated tin. Yin parked the Jeep about 200 feet from the restaurant, hiding it behind some oil storage tanks. We were on the outskirts of town now, and almost no one was on the street. Inside the building we found one room with 6 rickety tables. A narrow whitewashed bar separated us from the kitchen, where several women worked. One of the women saw us sit down and came over to us. Yin spoke briefly to her in Tibetan, and I caught the word for soup. The woman nodded and looked at me. The same I said to Yin, taking off my coat and draping it behind me on the chair. And water, Yin translated, and the woman smiled and walked away. Yin turned serious. Did you understand what I said earlier? You must now set a field that brings more synchronicity. I nodded. How do I set that field? The first thing you must do is to make sure you build on the first extension. Be certain the energy is flowing into you and out into the world. Feel the measures. Set your expectation for this energy to be constant. Now you must expect that your prayer field will act to bring forth just the thoughts and events necessary for your best destiny to unfold. In order to set this field around you, you must keep yourself in a state of conscious alertness. Alert for what? For synchronicity. You must keep yourself in a state where you are constantly looking for the next mysterious bit of information that helps you towards your destiny. Some synchronicity will come to you no matter what you do, but you can increase the occurrence if you set a constant field by always expecting it. I reached into my back pants pocket for my notebook. Although I hadn't used it before, I had an intuition to make note of what Yin was saying. Then I remembered that I'd left the notebook in the Jeep. It's locked, he said, handing me the keys with a nod of his head. Don't go anywhere else. I went straight to the Jeep, retrieved the notebook, and was about to head back when the sounds of vehicle pulling up to the restaurant startled me. I moved back behind the tanks and looked out at the scene. In front of the restaurant were two grey Chinese-built trucks. 5 or 6 men in plain clothes got out of the trucks and went into the restaurant. From where I was, I could see inside through the windows. The men lined everyone up against the wall and began to search them. I tried to locate Yin, but couldn't see him anywhere. Did he escape? A new Land Cruiser pulled up outside, and a tall, lanky Chinese official in a military uniform got out and walked towards the door. He was clearly the man in charge. At the door he looked inside briefly, then stopped and turned around. Looking up both sides of the street as though sensing something, he turned my way and I ducked behind the bins again, my heart racing. After a moment I risked a glance towards the restaurant. The Chinese were bringing out the people and loading them into the trucks. Yin wasn't among them. One of the cars drove away as the officer in charge spoke to the remaining men. He seemed to be directing them to search the street. I ducked around the tank and took a large breath. I knew if I stayed there it would be only a matter of time before they found me. Looking for options, I noticed a narrow dirt alleyway that ran from the tanks through the next street. I jumped into the Jeep, put it into neutral, and used the small incline of the street to roll through the alley, turning right on the next corner. I started the vehicle but had no idea where I was going. All I wanted to do was put some distance between me and the soldiers. After a few blocks I took a left onto a narrow lane which took me into an area that had few buildings. 100 more yards and I seemed to be completely out of town. A mile later I pulled off the road and parked behind a cluster of high rocky mounds at each side of the house. Now what? I thought. I was completely lost with absolutely no idea where to go. A flash of anger and frustration raced through me. Yin should have prepared me for this possibility. Probably someone he knew in town could help me, but I had no way to find anyone now. A flock of crows landed on the mound to my right, then flew up over the Jeep and circled, cawing loudly. I looked out the window in both directions, certain that someone was disturbing the birds, but I saw no one. After a few minutes, most of the crows flew towards the west, still cawing, but one stayed at the top of the mound, silently looking at my direction. That's good, I thought. He can be a sentry. I could stay put until I decided what to do. In the back of the Jeep I found some dried fruit and nuts along with some crackers. I ate them unconsciously, taking occasional nervous drinks from the canteen of water. I knew I had to devise a plan. It came to me to head further up the road to the west, but I decided against it. A great fear was overwhelming me now, and I wanted only what I had desired all along, to forget about this trek and get back to Lhasa and then to the airport. I knew I could remember some of the returns, but the others I would have to guess at. I couldn't believe I hadn't tried to call someone at Lama Rigdon's monastery or later at Hans to set up an escape plan. As I thought about what to do, my heart froze. Uh-oh. I could hear the first rumblings of a vehicle coming down the road in my direction. I thought about starting the Jeep and pulling away, but realised the vehicle was closing too fast. Instead, I grabbed the canteen and a sack of food, ran down the furthest mound, and hid in a place where I was out of sight, but could still see what was happening. The vehicle slowed down. As it pulled up, even with me, I realised it was the van we'd seen earlier at that roadblock. The driver was the blonde man whom the Chinese soldier had been interrogating, and in the passenger seat was a woman. As I watched, they slowed the van to a complete stop and began to talk. I thought about going out and talking to them, but immediately felt a flash of fear. What if the soldiers had alerted them about us, insisting that they be notified if we were seen? Would they turn me in? The woman opened her door slightly as though to get out, still talking with the man. Had they spotted the Jeep? My mind was running wild. I decided that if she got out and came over, I would just start running. That way they would only get the Jeep, and I could put some distance between myself and this place before the officials came. With that thought in mind, I looked back at the van. The two were gazing towards the mound, an expression of concern on their faces. They looked at each other one more time before the woman slammed her door shut, and they sped away towards the west. I watched the van crest the small hill to the left and disappear. Somewhere inside me I felt disappointed. Maybe they could have helped me, I thought. I considered running to the Jeep and overtaking them, but I dismissed the idea. Better not to tempt fate, I concluded. It was more prudent to go back to my original plan and attempt to find my way back to Lhasa and home. After about half an hour, I returned to the Jeep and started the engine. The crow to my left squawked and flew down the road in the direction of the Dutch van had gone. I turned the other way and headed back towards Zongba, taking a series of small roadways, hoping to bypass the main streets and the restaurant and make it several more miles before I reached the top of a hill. I slowed the Jeep as I crested the peak so that I could survey the long expanse of highway in the distance. When I got into a position to see, I was shocked. Not only was there a new roadblock set half a mile down the mountain with dozens of soldiers, but I could count 4 big trucks and 2 jeeps filled with troops heading my way, closing fast. I quickly turned the Jeep around and raced back in the direction I'd come, hoping they wouldn't see me. I knew I would be lucky to outpace them. I reasoned that I should travel further west as far as I could, then veer south and east. Perhaps there were enough small roads that I could get back to Lhasa that way. I darted across the main street into a series of side roads again, heading south. I turned a curve and realised I was going the wrong way. I had inadvertently returned to the main road again. Before I could stop, I was less than 100 feet from another Chinese checkpoint. There were soldiers everywhere. I pulled over to the side of the road and put on the brake, and slid way down in the seat. Now what, I thought? Prison? What would they do to me? Would they think me a spy? After a few moments, I noticed that the Chinese seemed oblivious to my presence, even though I was parked in plain sight. Old cars and carts and even pedestrians on bikes kept passing me, and the soldiers would stop them all and ask for identifications, checking their papers and sometimes searching them, yet they paid me no attention at all. I glanced to the right and realised that I was parked just short of a driveway that led up to a small stone house several hundred feet away. To the left of the house was a small lawn of uncut grass, and beyond the grass I could see another street. Just at that moment, a large truck drove past and stopped right in front of me, blocking my view of the checkpoint. Moments later, a blue Toyota Land Cruiser driven by another blonde man came up and pulled around the truck. Next I heard loud talking and shouts in Chinese. The vehicle seemed to be backing up as if to try to turn around, but the soldiers swarmed it. Although my line of sight was blocked, I could hear angry shouts in Chinese, interspersed by fearful pleas in English that carried a Dutch accent. "No, please," the voice said. "I'm sorry, I'm a tourist. Look, I have a special license to drive on the road." Another car pulled up. My heart leaped in my chest. It was the same Chinese official I'd seen at the restaurant earlier. I slipped further down in the seat, trying to hide as he walked right past me. "Give me your papers," he asked the Hollander in perfect English. As I listened, I noticed something move to my right and peered through the passenger window to see what it was. The driveway down towards the house appeared to be bathed in a warm, luminous glow, the exact same glow I had witnessed when Yin and I had escaped just outside Lhasa, the Dakini. The Jeep was idling, so all I had to do was pull slowly to the right and down the drive. I was barely breathing as I passed the house and drove through the gates to the next street and turned left. A mile further, I turned left again, heading north out of town on the side street I'd taken earlier. 10 minutes later, I was back at the mound, pondering what to do. Down the road, to the west, I heard another crow call. Instantly, I decided to head in that direction, the way I could have been travelling all along. The road led up a steep rise, crested, and then settled into a long straight away along a rocky plain. I drove for several hours as the afternoon light began to fade. There were no cars or people to be seen anywhere, and almost no houses. Half an hour later, it was completely dark, and I was thinking about finding a place to pull over for the night when I noticed a narrow gravel drive heading off to my right. I slowed the Jeep and looked more closely. There was something just to the side of the driveway. It looked like an item of clothing. I stopped the Jeep and shined a flashlight out through the window. It was a parka. My parka. The one I'd left in the restaurant just before the Chinese had come. Smiling, I switched off the light. Yin must have placed my jacket here. I got out of the Jeep, picked it up and drove up the narrow road with the headlights off. The drive led about half a mile up a gradual incline to a small house and barn. I drove cautiously. Several goats looked at me from across a fence. On the porch of the house, I noticed a man sitting on a stool. I stopped the Jeep and he stood up. I knew that silhouette. It was Yin. I got out of the Jeep and ran up to him. He met me in a stiff embrace, smiling. "I'm glad to see you," he said. "You see, I said you were being helped." "I was almost caught," I replied. "How did you get away?" A nervousness returned to his face. "The women at the restaurant are very cunning. They saw the Chinese officers and hid me in the oven. No one ever looked in there." "What do you think will happen to the woman?" I asked. He met my eyes, but said nothing for a long moment. "I do not know," he replied. "Many people are paying a high price for helping us." He looked away and pointed to the Jeep. "Help me bring in some food and we'll make something to eat." As Yin made a fire, he explained that after the police had left, he had gone back to his friend's house, and they had suggested this old house as a place for him to stay while they looked around for another vehicle. "I knew that you might have been overwhelmed by fear and try to get back to Lhasa," Yin added, "but I also knew that if you decided to continue on this journey, you would eventually try to head northwest again. That was the only road, so I placed your jacket there, hoping it would be you who saw it and not the soldier." "That was quite a risk," I said. He nodded as he put the vegetables in a heavy boiler filled with several inches of water and hung it on a metal hook over the fire to steam. Yak dung flames leapt at the bottom of the pan. Seeing Yin again seemed to take much of my fear away, and as we sat down in a dusty old chairs by the fire, I said, "I have to admit that I did try to get away. I thought it was my only chance to survive." I went on to tell him everything that had happened, everything that is except the experience of the lights around the house. When I got to the part where I was in the mounds and the van came by, he sat up in his chair. "You are sure it was the same van we saw at the roadblock?" he asked pointedly. Yes, it was them, I replied. He looked totally exasperated. You saw the people we had seen before, and you didn't speak with them? His face had an edge of anger. Don't you remember me telling you about my dream, about us meeting someone who could help us find the gateway? I didn't want to take a chance that they would report me, I protested. What? He stared at me and then leaned over and held his face in his hands for a moment. I was petrified, I said. I can't believe I'd gotten myself in this situation. I wanted out. I wanted to survive. Listen to me closely, Yin said. The chances of your getting out of Tibet now by fleeing are very slim. Your only chance of surviving is to go forward. And to do that, you have to use the synchronicity. I looked to get away, knowing he was probably right. Tell me what happened when the van approached, Yin said. Every thought, every detail. I told him the van had stopped, and when it did, I immediately grew afraid. I described how the woman acted as if she wanted to get out, but changed her mind and they left. He shook his head again. You killed the synchronicity with a misuse of your prayer field. You set your field with fearful expectations, and it stopped everything. I looked away. Think about what was happening, Yin continued. When you heard the van approaching, you had two choices. You have thought about the occurrence. You could have thought about that occurrence as a threat or as a potential aid. Certainly you have to consider both. But once you recognize the van, that should have told you something. The fact that it was the same van that we'd seen earlier at the crossroads is meaningful, especially since these same people created the diversion that allowed us to go by without being seen. From that point of view, they had already helped you, and now we're there to possibly help you again. I nodded. He was right. Clearly I had blown it. Yin looked away, distracted by his own thoughts, and said, You completely lost your energy and positive expectation. Remember what I told you at the restaurant? Setting a field for synchronicity is a matter of putting yourself in a particular state of mind. It is easy to think about synchronicity intellectually, but unless you enter the state of mind where your prayer field will help, all you will do is glimpse the coincidences every once in a while. In some situations that's enough and you'll be led forward for a time, but eventually you'll lose your direction. The only way to establish a constant flow of synchronicity is to stay in a state where your prayer field keeps this flow moving forward, keeps this flow moving towards you, a state of conscious alertness. I'm still not sure how to get into the state of mind. One must stop and remind oneself to assume an attitude of alertness every moment. One must visualize that one's energy is going out and bringing just the right hunches to you, the right events. You have to expect them to occur at any moment. We set our fields to bring us synchronicity by being ever vigilant, always expecting the next encounter. Every time you forget to keep yourself in this state of expectation, you must catch yourself and remember. The more you stay in this state of mind, the more the synchronicity will increase. And eventually, if you keep your energy high, this posture of conscious alertness will become your prevailing attitude towards life. The legends say the prayer extensions will eventually be second nature to us. We will set them in the morning as routinely as getting dressed. That is the place you must reach, the state of mind where you have this expectation constantly. He paused and looked at me for a moment. When you heard the vehicle coming towards you, you immediately went into fear. From the sounds of it, they were intuiting that they should stop at the mounds, although they probably had no idea why. But when you went into fear, thinking that they were probably the bad guys, your field actually went out and had an effect on them, entering their fields and probably making them feel something was amiss, that they were doing something wrong, so they took off. What he was telling me was fantastic, but it felt true to me. Tell me more about how our fields affect people, I said. He shook his head. You're getting ahead of yourself. The effect of our fields on other people is the third extension. For now, just concentrate on setting a field for synchronicity and not going into fearful thoughts. You have a tendency to expect the worst. Remember when we were on our way to Lama Rigdon's and I left you alone? You saw a group of refugees and they would have led you right to Lama's monastery if only you had talked to them. But instead, you figured that they were going to turn you in, and you missed the synchronicity. The negative thinking is a pattern with you. I just looked at him, feeling tired. He smiled and didn't mention any of my mistakes again. We talked casually about Tibet for most of the evening, going outside at one point to look up at the sky, at the stars. The sky was clear and the temperature barely freezing. Above us were the brightest stars I've ever seen, and I commented to Yin about it. Of course they look big, he said. You're standing on the rooftop of the world. Okay, that's it for the moment. Look for part 2. Don't forget to look at the links down below. Look at the links on my channel. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video will be uploaded. Take care, and blessed be.